All right, good evening, everybody. So at your seat is a blue folder with a couple of documents. It's not complete. We're going to hand out some other documents later this evening. So first and foremost is in the document in the folder is the agenda, and then on the right-hand side are the two documents that we'll be looking at this evening and presenting to the superintendent. These are the two updated. This is what we're calling version 5 of both the policy framework and the document that contains the proposed changes to policy and or administrative directive on the policies that govern boundary changes. So first I just wanted to say thanks everyone to actually, you guys had about a 2-day window in order to get a number of comments in, and I was appreciative that a number of folks actually did. And so after 1 o'clock, Joe, Pamela, and I worked to kind of incorporate all of those. And so the most recent versions you've got are the ones that incorporate everything that in terms of comments that were provided between Tuesday and 1 o'clock this afternoon. So I just want to say thank you all so much for stepping up to get us some really good feedback. So I'll just quickly walk through the agenda and we'll get ahead with the business of the meeting. We'll do public comment, which will be facilitated by John. I'll do some welcome and opening remarks later on, and then we'll do a discussion with the superintendent to do an overview as to where this preliminary recommendation package is. It's not final yet, so just giving her an overview of where we are to date, and then we'll get her feedback from her and have some conversation with her about what's working, where are some areas for improvement if we need it. And then using the bulk of the time to really dive deep and say, based on what we've learned from that, incorporate some additional comments. And if we have the ability to tonight, is to see if there's a way we could potentially adopt this package or call for a vote, because you guys have done some phenomenal work on this, and I think we're really close. And then after that, we wanted to reserve some time towards the end of the meeting to really think about what's the next series of meetings look like for us in the summer. I do admit I want to give everyone a break, at least at some point in July, for at least 2 to 3 weeks, because we've been doing meetings, I think, every week for the last 3 or 4 weeks, so you all have really stepped up, and I want to give you guys a break to time and enjoy some time off it being summer. So with that, that's just a quick overview, and I'm going to turn it over to John to facilitate public comment.
Okay, so we have 2 people signed up for public comment. So first, we'll invite up Dave Porter.
Right here.
Oh, there you go.
Here, passing.
Dave Porter.
I have them in writing.
He's ready to go.
Mm-hmm. Ready to go. So I've got 3 points I want to make. They're sort of brief. Number 1, when the D-BRAC meets with the superintendent, the D-BRAC should ask the superintendent 2 questions. A, does the superintendent think the large variations in racial demographics and family income demographics of student populations between many neighborhood schools is a racial equity issue? B, does the superintendent want D-BRAC to present her with potential framework values and policies to reduce those variations? So number 2, with respect to any proposal which might open transfer slots at schools for income-eligible students, such income-eligible students seeking transfers exist. As reported by Junie Brennan in her 610 memo to the board, there were 285 income-eligible transfer applicants in the 2015-16 lottery. 193 were approved. Here's my chart of her data. And 3, Cambridge Public Schools, that's Massachusetts, uses a controlled choice system to balance the percentages of students who do not qualify for the free and reduced lunch program at individual schools to the school district's averages. The D-BRAC should consider adapting the Cambridge controlled choice system to PPS. More info on the Cambridge public school system follows. You can read that. I think the Cambridge, just to ad lib, I think the Cambridge system shares some characteristics with what Brooks Cohen is going to talk about in her system. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you very much. So our next public comment is from Brooke Cowan. Dave, can I ask you? This is for committee members.
Yeah,
table.
I'm going to leave this. Yeah.
Okay, thank you very much.
I was making sure I got them.
Okay.
got his good side.
Dave has a plan.
Let the nose of the camera under the.
Hi. So I have more to say about dynamic enrollment balancing in PPS. So by removing hard boundaries from the student assignment mechanism, the soft neighborhood model I've been developing enables our district to dynamically balance enrollment from year to year. The soft neighborhood framework places families in schools close to their home while aiming to satisfy hard constraints. What did I say? I was working on this till just like 2 minutes ago. Satisfy hard constraints expressed by target capacity to enter school. It encourages population mixing and creates school communities of families who live close to each other. It is not a boundary model. There is no guarantee that a particular address determines assignment to a particular school. Nor is it a school choice model. There is no overt ranking of families' school preferences. This is important because choice-based programs are often characterized as conferring strategic advantages to better educated and wealthier families. The soft neighborhood framework is an equitable, dynamic system that balances out enrollment by sharing capacity across nearby schools. Last time we saw how the soft neighborhood model adapts to population shifts in a synthetic data set. Tonight's handout focuses on setting up a framework for performing simulations on PPS data. My goal over the next several meetings is to evaluate the behavior of the soft neighborhood model via simulations on PPS data and to compare this behavior to the current system. My handout this evening presents a glimpse into this analysis. Focusing on kindergarten assignment, I present some initial results based on the existing data sets. I define a few metrics for comparing the simulated results to the historical PPS results, focusing on the distance students have to travel to get to school and the degree to which each kindergarten classroom is over or under enrolled. In subsequent evaluations, I intend to define additional metrics, including those that reflect the degree of mixing and diversity under the model. The current data sets have some flaws that limit the effectiveness of the simulations. However, there are two takeaway messages from the initial results. One, students travel comparable distances whether assignments are done using the current system or the soft neighborhood system. And two, soft neighborhoods do a far better job of controlling under and over enrollment at the kindergarten level. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Brooke. Okay, Jason, do you have process items to go through?
I don't have any process items because I covered them early on. So
Okay.
I'm good.
Okay. So we'll move into our discussion with Superintendent Smith, who's here with us. And I'm turning it over to you and your team to do an initial presentation, right? And then we'll go into a discussion.
So, and John, for this section, can you give my group a time limit of 15 minutes because we want to reserve 30
For the presentation?
Yeah.
Okay.
So 15.
It's 6 o'clock sharp right now, so.
Perfect. Okay. So, all right, everyone. So as I said earlier, the discussion tonight is to kind of just give the superintendent a preview of the work that we've been spending the last several months on, in particular the last 2 months. So the subcommittee is going to spend a few minutes kind of walking through both the document and the proposed changes to policy and administrative directive for about 15 minutes at the most, and then we'll turn it over to a Q&A session between the superintendent and us where John will facilitate. So we'll just go ahead and get started. And these again are the 2 documents in your folders. So first is I'm going to have everyone turn to the document titled District-Wide Boundary View Values and Policy Framework. It's draft version 5 dated June 25th. So if everyone actually will start on page 2, which is the D-BRAC's context. So over the course of this work, there were a number of kind of context pieces that help set the stage for, we think, the work that we embarked on from November forward. And so I just wanted to walk through some of the statements that we think encapsulate some of the context and the key themes and general learnings that we developed since we started meeting in November. So first and foremost is that D-BRAC believes that every student, regardless of race, income, or zip code, should achieve and thrive at Portland Public Schools. This is so even though in the current system that there are significant disparities in student success. While we acknowledge that this is our aspirational goal, clearly across the district that doesn't exist. So it's important that for a boundary review framework and long-term enrollment balancing measures, that is one of the common aiming points that the district should aim for, and using a different using boundary change processes as one lever in order to get there for students across the district. Second is D-BRAC understands that there are disparities in educational outcomes which are a result of the persistent impacts of institutional racism. That the achievement gap manifests in inequitable impacts experienced by lower income households and communities of color, resulting in part from the lasting impacts of segregation of our neighborhoods, gentrification, rising housing prices, and related school enrollment instability. So what we're acknowledging there is that there are a number of conditions, both inside and outside PPS's control, that are the result of historic institutional racism that have caused the inequities that we have currently in place, both inside the district's control, outside. So together, they've created the system that we have now. And it's important long-term that if the district is going to, in fact, achieve some of the long-term outcomes and goals we've identified, that we have to acknowledge that where you can make immediate change, go for it, and when there are outside systemic factors, that the district should find a way to play a role in mitigating those factors to the best of its ability. Third is, the D-BRAC acknowledges that in an effort to build a school system that supports every student's potential to thrive, the superintendent led PPS to undertake a number of efforts to eliminate the achievement gaps. So this is establishing that in the context of the district's racial equity work, that the superintendent Smith and the board led a number of initiatives to set the framework for implementing a focus on racial equity throughout the system. Those included the milestone framework, policies around allocating more budget and staffing resources, and the superintendent's 3 priorities, which are indicated on page 3. D-BRAC also believes that by graduation, all students should be positive and productive citizens who are either prepared to succeed at a competitive college or university or prepared to succeed in the workforce. So an outcome long-term that we all believe is the preparedness of every kid. So boundary review and an enrollment balancing effort should play a role in setting the conditions so kids get access to strong programs and educational offerings. Also, D-BRAC recognizes that the system serves the needs of a diverse student body. So the district has a variety of students that it serves based on race, gender, income, language, students also receiving special education services, and tag students. So with the recognition that the demographics of the student body in PPS are diverse and all need real needs and focuses, that we have to build both an enrollment balancing and a boundary review process that allows the district to serve the needs of those students long-term. Also, D-BRAC believes that the school district's efforts at enrollment balancing, both at the decision-making process and implementation, has been inconsistent and unclear for many years. This has led to mistrust of the intent, fairness, and effectiveness of the PPS's approach to enrollment balancing. So what we're saying there is, while the district has about 6 different levers to manage enrollment at different schools, what we have come to learn over time is that the different levers have been applied inequitably. There's been no clear process to understand how the different levers have been applied, and that over time has led to the lack of trust that the community has in really understanding what the district is choosing to do, and in particular, what kind of outcomes the district is trying to achieve by using those particular levers. And then lastly, D-BRAC recognizes that forecast growth in student enrollment of more than 5,000 students in the next 10 years makes having an effective, transparent, and fair enrollment balancing system even more critical to the student success and equitable outcomes. So what we're also saying there is, given that we are slated to grow significantly over the next 10 years, you have to have a larger long-term framework that can manage enrollment district-wide, so that I can ensure that any kid, regardless of what neighborhood that they live in, they're going to be in a healthy, safe school that offers the programs that not only serve them equitably, but prepare them for college and career upon graduation. Oh, yeah. So that's the general context of where we've gotten to today in terms of what was in our thinking about what began to inform our process around landing a number of components to the report. Second is the guiding values that we think not only drove our work, but we believe should drive future boundary review processes. So first and foremost is, we reviewed the existing policies around enrollment transfer and boundary review. So one of the things that we recognized in that policy framework was a couple of things. One is, while it did identify 6 different levers, what became clear to us were a couple of things. One is that there were no set of clear values and outcomes that not only drove boundary review, but all of the enrollment balancing levers. So there's no clear way to say if you have an enrollment condition at building X, what is the long-term goal for healthy enrollment and program offerings in that building, which would help you determine, based on the conditions, which lever you actually pull, and no criteria to say which lever you should pull. So the values was one piece. And what also, the other second piece of that, what was lacking was that existing policy and administrative directive didn't set the stage for what triggers actually determine which lever you actually pull. So that's one of the issues that we'll actually recommend as part of our long-term strategies and recommendations. And so with that, I'm going to turn it over. So I see the values?
Yeah.
Okay. So there are 3 values that we adopted through this work. One was equity. So equity we defined in 2 parts. Equity in process and outcomes is a primary determinant of successful boundary review. In order for every student to thrive in PPS, regardless of demographic, the district will use its racial educational equity policy when developing boundary review options and will apply the racial equity lens throughout the process to ensure that outcomes are equitable. And second, equity also means looking at all student demographics and educational groups. English language learners, students receiving special education services, and talented and gifted students, students of color, low-income students, etc., to ensure that policy supports strong outcomes for these and any other identified subgroups. So while not only are we acknowledging that the racial equity policy needs to be applied to understand the impacts of communities of color and underserved communities, but it's more than just students by race. It's a multitude of demographics, and if the district is going to serve all students, it's about looking at any demographic as a primary way to figure out how to serve students equitably and fairly. Second is access. That regardless of any student demographic, every student will have access to and opportunities to benefit from equitable and effective academic programs, including enrichment, elective offerings, and appropriate individualized support services that ensure that they can thrive and achieve their potential in Portland Public Schools. So what we're saying there is any student, regardless of what part of Portland you live in, is going to have access to strong programs, elective and enrichment offerings, and the appropriate support services. So any part of Portland, you should be able to have access to the same kinds of programs. So for example, like if you live on the west side, you have some programs, on the east side you don't. There shouldn't be that program inconsistency there. And then third is environment. In order to enable equitable access to programs, all school facilities should have the appropriate student enrollment, grade configuration, and physical support for programmatic needs that match the size of the facility. So we're saying there that for all of the programmatic decisions that you want to make to have programs in a building, that all of them have to be actually fit in the building. So if you're going to offer some kinds of academic programs in a particular building, you have to have the facility support service to actually match. And so if you're going to offer an academic program, you need to build the additional infrastructure there as well. So those are the 3 guiding values that we worked from about April to mid-May on that would help not only drive boundary review decisions for this fall, but potentially enrollment balancing decisions long term. So I'm going to turn it over to Joe.
So you can see, Superintendent, we start from many weeks of discussion of what we think is going on and had to give ourselves some structure. So the guiding values are the highest level piece of that. And then this next, the desired outcomes, are kind of like translating those values into something that you can see on the ground when you're making a boundary decision. There's 3, strong and stable environment in all schools, and this is kind of the nuts and bolts, making sure that overcrowding or under-enrolled schools is balanced in a way that's really for the viability of the schools and their ability to deliver programs. And the group also saw value in having a system that is sort of successful in that way so that we can keep a high capture rate, high rates of school-age students attending district schools. So we were interested in sort of both of those pieces. Second, it's all about transparency because we think that's a lot of the friction and heat that's generated around enrollment balancing. And so knowing what the system is and sort of being clear about how the choices are made. And then the third was racial equity lens, since we took that as a value that's clearly expressed by the school district, and actually it's one held by the committee in a variety of ways, but that's what we're trying to be about. So when one does it, we can look at that decision and sort of see in a clear way how the racial equity lens was used. And so the next part is the big sort of, I think, breakthrough thinking about this for us, at least, and a little bit maybe it didn't, was that we're asked to look at boundary changes, but it's just one of that whole suite. And we came up with values and these outcomes, and so we're trying to be systematic about building a point of view to get down to actually policies, which we'll talk about next, around that one tool. Well, the whole system needs something like that. And something like that will help with the transparency of the system. Something like that we think would help with the decision-making in the system. So, you know, and as you've already heard, we saw that we couldn't see that this kind of value statement or metrics and triggers in the other tools. So the framework is an enrollment balancing system. Changing boundaries is one of 6 tools. And then we have short and long-term actions to kind of be responsive to the charge you gave us, which was to look at boundaries, but also we think set us up for a more successful overall system in the future. So the short-term ones is enrollment balancing review is an annual sort of process, which seems daunting given how long it's taken us to just do this piece. But this is thought of as something that's really looking into the problems. This is not trying to rethink the whole system. Second, it's when you do it annually, it'll be citywide, and it's going to be it's a citywide look, and it's solving immediate problems, but it's also taking a look at that in the context of the 5 to 7 year forecast, whatever PSU is providing. So currently we're looking ahead. It's got the racial equity lens built into it in terms of how it deliberates. Since these are short-term actions, Superintendent, you know, the figuring out of the values and the outcomes and sort of giving all the other policies that kind of transparent framework is going to take time. So initially, at least, we're thinking that the values and outcomes that we're proposing for boundaries might as well sort of apply to the other levers. And then what Pamela will talk about next is sort of how you get to maybe refining those more specifically. And the 5th point is a big point, and it came from the survey. It came from our discussions, which is that we landed on the side of trying to find ways to use this system, including boundary changes, to move, to cause change in school as quickly as we can. Faster is better than drawing it out. However, that doesn't mean we're crazy. That has to happen in a setting where we're making the deliberate decisions for success. So that means, well, the first of these is that in addition to moving fast, you know, our priority is do no harm to the most vulnerable students. Because historically and just sort of, I guess, practically, they can often run the receiving end of these changes and are most impacted. So that's our one of our main targets. If we were to use the equity lens, that's maybe a simple statement for the population we identified. But then the rest are the things that just seem like good system planning. We want to move fast, and we want to make sure that our speed of change is related to the financial and human capacity to handle that transition. So at the schools and in the households. So that's, you know, getting those resources or whatever it takes to line it up is a big part. The next of these is in the same spirit. It's budget staffing, you know, getting those kind of real practical physical systems. And the third one of these really relates back, I think, to even the K-8, you know, decision. We're still here in this group processing that. But it's the idea that we're going to make changes and we're going to think ahead, even maybe before pulling the trigger, to get resources in place so that, you know, the time lag between whatever we're doing and whatever we manifest is more smooth. That's the short-term sort of view, and then Pamela will take it from here.
So understanding that there were, you know, we're charged with how can we affect boundary change next year. We wanted to have a lens of look at the immediate term, but then also acknowledge that there are certain things that may not be able to change as fast as we'd like them to, but that we wanted to make sure happen on a more continuous basis if we are going to establish annual district-wide boundary review. And one of those was actually that we strongly support the PSU original recommendation that there's this joint D-BRAC, SACIT, some formulation of an ongoing committee that would really do two things. It would support the district by providing transparency, providing citizen input, but it would also provide accountability to the enrollment balancing process. And then also to say that this policy review is a 5-year process. So acknowledging that the district is changing and it's always changing, and so that at a minimum every 5 years, there will be a policy review of these enrollment balancing policies so that we make sure that they're aligned with what our desired outcomes are. Then the third is to develop guiding policies for all of the levers. So acknowledging that our charge is quite narrow, and that Sackett has looked at the enrollment, the transfer level, and there's all of these other things that can happen, and that we want to make sure that they're all aligned, because it's that system that really affects the experience at the school level. So we could change, grade configuration 1 year and boundaries the next year, and then not change boundaries for 5 years, but we felt this turmoil. So to really view that as a system, make sure that it has policies that are all aligned. And then also in the longer term, develop criteria to be explicit about when you use what lever and why, and how school assignment and sibling preference support enrollment balancing. And I'll come back to that in a minute, but you heard a little bit about, Brooke has a completely alternative to the current status. So we don't know that we've had in the short term time to actually evaluate all of the pros and cons and move that quickly, but we want to keep that on the radar screen. I think we heard when you came to talk before, I want a flexible system, and so we need to keep looking at what creates a flexible system. In terms of specific policy and administrative directive recommendations, I'm not going to read you the current policy, but really the policy promotes stability, and we know that that's a value in our community, and we want to acknowledge and support the family's desire for stability. But also to understand that when you disaggregate a lot of the survey data, the teachers overwhelmingly support rapid change. Many of the Title I school recipients, future parents support rapid change. And so, communities of color. And so, after looking at that disaggregated data and also wanting to have an impact and feeling like this is sort of this moment in time, we didn't necessarily want to recommend change the policy, because that sibling preference policy is embedded in so much language. What we would do is create an inconsistency in policy, but we did notice that there is a opportunity for creating an exception to the existing policy and that this idea that this is our first district-wide look is an opportunity for you to create more impact in the short term by considering the possibility of doing this change as an exception. And then giving the committee longer time to look at more broadly what policies really support change and that balance of change and stability, the right balance. And so that's really, most of our recommendations fell into the administrative directive category, because that's really where the action is, with the exception of this sort of soft recommendation not to change policy, to look at how policies apply in this specific instance. I think we're good. We're only 5 minutes in.
Okay, so we have about 25 minutes for a discussion. So I think what I want to do first is just ask if any other committee members just want to add anything to what the subcommittee presented, and then we can just open it up for dialogue. And we can do it by doing the cards.
Is that the universal card?
Yeah, yes, there we go. Okay, so I have Margaret.
Oh, this guy.
Yeah, okay, so Margaret, Scott, then Kim.
Oh, no, I was just practicing.
We're making sure it's done right.
Sorry.
Kim's always doing this. Well, I was like, is that this?
Yeah, we have a lot of things.
Or is that this? Yeah.
Margaret had your back. She helped you out there.
Thank you. Appreciate that.
Scott.
I'm half awake, I'm just catching up
Yep.
with stuff. I want to comment on the district should implement the change as quickly as possible. And I would say where needed. And it's, immediate change is needed in a lot of spots, but if, as we're rolling something out, if immediate change is not needed and it can start at the next kindergarten class, then why move? Why not just roll it out slowly in some places and quickly where it's needed for programmatic activity? So that's one question. The second is channeling Dave Porter. Do we believe the research that says that if you have a high segregation of low-income students, you have poor outcomes? And if we do, then what are we going to do about it? And that's maybe implicit in here, if you call it the equity lens, racial and other equity lens. But that's, I want to make sure that's on the table for discussion.
Okay, so thanks for those comments. I wanted, so you guys are having a discussion as a committee after this about, so I wanted, just because you have the superintendent for about 20 more minutes, just if there's any more the committee wants to say to her about the work you've been doing in the presentation. That's what I intended, but you have a chance to talk about those things. I'm not saying they're not.
Sorry,
It's okay.
Good.
Okay. Anybody else? Okay, so do you have any questions that you would like to ask? Anything you need?
No,
I think
I
they're
will.
looking for feedback on you.
I'm totally appreciating the values and and even that you're really locating your focus inside administrative directives is actually good in the sense that we're able to move that more swiftly. Like I want some stuff that the board actually feels like they're able to consider and weigh in on and bless or whatever we do with it. But so that I find myself trying to wrestle with okay, making something that happens more swiftly. It's the same tensions of how are you both doing continuity of and stability for families, doing it slow over time, but trying to make it happen quickly, that it didn't totally reconcile in my head how all those things are happening as I was reading this. So I was still kind of feeling like we're placing values on all those things, which end up really being tensions as you're trying to figure out what's the action that you take and how swiftly is it. It will take 12 years because you're starting in kindergarten and letting it play itself out, and so really it doesn't feel quick, or it's fast and families feel really disrupted because, or they have siblings who are separated, or just anyway. So I couldn't totally grasp how I was applying this as I was listening it. So I probably have to spend a little more time with it and make that come alive for myself. I felt like the emphasis, I like what I feel as emphasis on health of the system being, I can feel in what your stuff is, which is a good thing. I think that does ultimately where we're taking care of our kids when we're paying attention to the health of the system. So I think those were good. I like that we're aligning the values of the multiple processes and focusing on all the levers, because I agree. I think the thing of like, how are we making this matter of fact? How are we doing it every year? How is it something that we're regularly tending to does make it feel more matter of fact and not like it's a big scary. I think it's always challenging because it's personal if you're somebody who's being impacted. And I think if we're doing it regularly, people come to understand what it is, and it feels less threatening and less like, okay, I'm being done to, because you get this is what we do. And we're so far from that. So, but I like that emphasis in here. Yeah, I just did the balancing of the continuity for families and kids, and you know, where's the disruption? Yeah, it happens someplace in here, and either we're holding the continuity, somebody gets impacted. So like, it's really hard that we're not making you move, you don't have any change, and somehow we balance the enrollment. So I couldn't feel how, I still felt the tension of that. And I think I'm just continuing to reread the end here about the accelerating the pace of change is one of the recommendations. Promote continuity and stability for students and families. Is this an area that you're still coming back and doing something with, or you're telling me that that you hold on to the students living in the neighborhood of boundary, approved for a boundary change, remain at their current school through the highest grade? You're holding on to this stability for families, or you're taking a look at this?
Yeah, I don't think we're done with that.
You're not done with that? Okay, then that does a bunch for me that you're still on
Because
that
we
one.
feel
I was
the
like,
same
okay, how
tensions.
are, you're going faster, but you're still holding on to all this stuff? I don't get what you're
No,
doing then.
no.
No, we're right at that
We're right at
dilemma
that.
that you just
Yeah.
presented.
Then you just
That's
did,
where
then
we are.
that does a lot for me right there.
And I think it's also because if you look at it from a systems perspective, right, so what is the definition of fast, right? The definition of fast on a systems level might not be, I mean, if you wait 2 years, you might be able to do a 4 times better job than if you do something in 1 year, but you do it messy, whatever. So we haven't even grappled with
Okay,
what
perfect.
that looks like.
Perfect.
And that's why we're going to be exploring and mining the AD, because that's what we
Perfect.
think that action is, but I don't know where we're going to take it.
So I would just offer that that is a perfect example of the use of the racial equity lens. Who's impacted most by fast versus
Yes.
who's impacted most by slow.
Yes.
So that's a perfect, and it takes you through all of the questions, including how are you going to mitigate it.
Okay. Is there someone over here? Oh, go ahead,
Yeah, I
Trish.
was
Sorry.
gonna say the other element to that specific issue is that we saw, as Pamela explained, that the families who feel like they are happy with what their situation want change to be slow. The families who feel that they're
Right.
not happy with their
Mhm.
situation.
Yeah, want it fast, want it now.
They want it
Yeah,
fast.
absolutely.
And that's obvious. And if we're using the racial equity lens to decide what should be slow and what should be fast, I think those things, and we're honest about that, I think those things will work out. But we need to somehow put that intention into the
Yes.
policy.
Okay.
Along those same lines,
Margaret.
I'm struggling with that tension, and especially the don't adversely affect or don't impact historically underserved populations. Unfortunately, those are the areas that need the most change. And so I think that we're going to, I guess the district, when this rolls out, if that's how this looks, I think it's gonna have to be, there's gonna have to be a lot of outreach of explaining what the intention, explaining that it's not going to look equitable, I think, at first, but it needs to happen, because unfortunately, looking at Portland, the areas that need the most help are colors of community, low SES, things like that. So that's something I'm still trying to reconcile in my head.
Margaret?
I think one of the I go back to a meeting that we had at Madison and sitting at a table and listening to families, and one of the pieces that was clear was that they said, yes, you should make changes and you should be, it was almost as if they wanted it to be very defined, like it should be very clear what the change is, and it should be resourced, right? So the resource should be there immediately, and not like, if you're gonna do something slow, don't move resources slowly, right? Like, put the resources there and make sure that it's resourced over a period of time that's gonna be sufficient. And I think the other piece that becomes into this interesting tension point is it shifted, at least, and then this is anecdotal, okay, so we didn't do a full study on this one, but it also is related, it was the sense of time and timing was related to the age of the student often. And so pace of change seemed faster at different grade levels than, and that kind of came through as people were talking. So that adds another layer of complexity to a system that's already fairly complex. But if you're looking, and we had some discussions about what's a meaningful time frame. Is it 4 years, because that's how long it takes to enter high school and exit high school? Is it 5 years or 6 years, because that's the length of elementary? Is it 3 years, because it's the length of a career? Like, is it a career? Is that what it is? So I think that there were some, like, how does that play out? What do those timeframes look like? Because it was interesting, and you could make it very complex or not, I guess, is the other piece. And so I think part of the tension that we heard from families as well is that it can be very complicated, but in some ways it isn't. And so they were wrestling with some of those pieces too. But the biggest takeaway I had was just make sure that whatever is done is resourced appropriately up front, and that commitment's over a number of years.
And I'm just going to say that one is interesting in the challenge it could present to us in terms of how we budget. So are we willing to say, this is a school that right now has 300 kids, we're budgeting for 400 kids, and everybody else is going to be fine with that. You're going to have, in your building, 600 kids, and we're budgeting you for 500.
Right.
In order to budget this one at 400, so it has an equitable program, and really it's only serving 300 kids right now. Like, there's a huge amount of, how do you really do that and have it, I mean, that will not hang with everybody. We do that on such a tiny scale, and it does. But it could be that that's part of the thing that we're trying to accomplish here, is how do you, because people will say, build the program, we will come. Build Jefferson High School for 1,600 and give us a comprehensive high school. We've got 500 kids right now, we will grow into it, but people will come if you build it. Okay, the whole rest of the system has to agree, meaning that we're all not going to come protest and do stuff. That's how we're doing it in order to have sufficient program that kids will then come to. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
So like when you're saying resource it now, yes, and that's a system conversation as well, just to say that. Which may be part of this, is that we're saying, yes, that's part of our intentionality here in terms of if we're trying to do the neighborhood school core value, which is one of the things that we've stated, how are we building that equitable program regardless of enrollment? Or looking at projected enrollment over the next 5 years, not what it is right now. Anyway, I just throw that in as another variable.
Joe?
Well, just so you know, we haven't really talked about this explicitly, but the way I understood the resource it in advance kind of question was, how long does it take to be ramp up? And so it's not so much build the whole program so it's sitting there trying to attract people. It's just in time almost. It's sort of, okay, you can't just flick the switch and somebody comes in and starts a whole other set of classes, but you can't just
Hold it indefinitely.
right. You just sort of I don't know what that period is, but there's a extra amount of money that's spent, but it's the ramp up, and in there's a certain amount of time, right? Because remember we were talking about the human resources too. A certain amount of time for that, and there's only a certain number of those schools that the district's going to be able to do at any given time because there's only so much money.
Yes.
So we haven't gotten, we didn't parse that, but I think we were talking more about that than the build it and they will come kind of.
Well, and I'm doing more as a illustrative, but I do feel like that is one of the things as you're in your conversation, that in a broad, high level, get specific about, okay, we also believe we should do on-ramp kind of budgeting that allows us, when we're doing this kind of I think there's some value statements in this that are about just how we make it actionable in a way that is supported.
Okay, let's go Michelle, then Kim.
Can I just say, and part of why I'm saying it coming out of here, because you will agree, if you guys agree to it, yes, this is worth that we say, we're willing to be under-resourced here in order to provide this kind of an on-ramp for something we're trying to do as a change, is a strong statement coming from a group like this, that's a cross-sectional group. I'm not looking for a detail, but I am looking for some kind of a value statement about that would be that you wrestle through a little bit and say, this is a necessary factor for success.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
So we'll go Michelle, then Maxine, then Kim. I'm letting people go first before we have repeat, so go ahead, Michelle.
That's a good
So one of our 3 big values is the access. And so I think we really need to hammer that, and I like that you're asking for more details, and it's an outcome that we have that. And where I've been getting stuck is a little bit on the definition of the program and access, and how we are knowing that we're there and what we're measuring. And so I don't know, as a group, I feel we haven't spent a lot of time talking about that exactly, like about the budgeting and about FTE and about what kinds and what schools have or don't have. And so I think that, I don't know what, I'm wondering if we need a little more background to be able to get to that level of recommendation for you, but I feel like I might personally need a little more, like, and then I'm very concerned about how do we measure program, I guess that's what I'm saying. So, and then I've said this, I don't know if you watched the videos, but we have these values, but I'm not sure we know how to measure the values, and so I'm stuck on that, and I could use some more information on, and I've asked you before, I think in different forums, like a very clear idea of how the budgeting process works and what each school gets. And
so I don't want to take you on a sidetrack, because that could be, like, I think when I'm doing I'm responding to your and resource it, that I think I'm looking for a high level kind of a statement about what it takes to do transition and what you might do differently for a school in a transitional phase. So not like don't go too far in the weeds on it, as much as a high level value around, like when we're doing these conversions, for instance, and we do grade level reconfiguration, that you might identify just a value statement that it's important that somehow you get the money to do the on-ramp, or I don't know what you'll do with it, but something that's just recognized, being overt about that, but not down into detail of it.
right, but I just want to say I am concerned about that detail, because if there's no way to evaluate what program, how much of a program exists, or if we're not, I guess it's the sort of the finishing the loop, like, oh, we're recommending these things and it should bring program, and then we have to sort of evaluate if the program actually is there and sufficient and equitable. And so I'm a little, like, I'd like to recommend those things, but I also kind of need to know how that circle gets closed. And I don't know, like, we have the access in there, I'm not sure how much more detail as a group. I mean, it'll be interesting to see if we come up with any real mechanism for suggesting how you do that. Because you have to know a little bit about budget, how the budget works, and what, I mean, wouldn't we want to do sort of a cost analysis? Ideally, like, we can't just say, oh, yes, and it could be wildly expensive and we have no idea. Or it could take away from people and put them below some, I mean, that's the equity part. Like, and you already have an equity allocation that's already doing that, so do we use this mechanism in addition to that? Like, it's kind of complicated. So I don't know.
We'll let Maxine go.
Thank you. I apologize to everyone for being so late. I got caught up in work with some things I needed to get done. So I came in kind of in the middle and don't know exactly where I'm at, but I do keep hearing equity, and I keep hearing it kind of bantered around. And so when I think about equity, I think about it as being, as we are doing it now, as sort of like a disparity mitigation effort. So, and when I think about that, I think the issue of equal doesn't really have a significant place, because if you're going to mitigate and you're going to do equity, address things from an equitable perspective, you realize that you are going in and correcting inequities that happened historically. And so when you look at it now, we can't just look at it totally from a budgetary or a cost perspective. We have to realize that whatever it is that we do in order to mitigate the disparities and address the inequities, it is gonna cost more. You can't allocate.
You differentiate.
Yeah, it's just different. And so I just basically wanted to interject and say that, because I keep hearing us talk about equity, but oftentimes I don't quite get the impression that we understand equity does not mean an equal allocation of things. Equity does not equal.
Absolutely.
Equity is not equal.
Yeah.
Addressing it is not gonna be, can't be looked at in that manner.
Okay, Kim, Scott. Okay, Michelle, you just kept yours up, right?
No, yeah, that's.
Okay, so Kim and then Scott and then Pam, and then that, we will be at about the end of our time, so.
I guess I just, you know, as the conversation's going, I have a problem with the scenario that you were giving, where, you know, you resource for 500 kids, even though there's only 400, and you resource for 500 kids, even though there's 600. That's not something that I'm willing to put my name on. However, I like what Maxine was saying, because the fact of the matter is we've never done a boundary change before on this level. And so if we're really trying to mitigate disparity and make significant historical changes, to me, I think that there has to be a courageous act there, even budgeting. And we've got to go out and really do what needs to be done. As far as resourcing, you know, one of the examples that was talked about last week was the fact of waiting until October to make any FTE shifts. Probably isn't going to, you know, you can't do business as usual on a big change like this. You've got to be a little bit quicker. The other example was of what not to do were the kids that had to go, the 8th graders that were sent at the high school level as the K-8 was done. That was definitely something that I wasn't able to be there, but that I was hearing parents were like, that cannot happen again. So I think it's just making sure that we're not adversely affecting a lot of our populations that have either done without or had bad done to. And as far as money goes, and I don't understand the budgeting, I don't know how much is out there, but as far as, I just feel like we have to go out on a limb on this one and really put our money where it is. And the fact of the matter is this to me feels like a rainy day, because we've never done this before. So if we have reserves and things like that, this is important work, and we're trying to fix a system that is, you know, it's broken. And if that's not a rainy day, I don't know what is. But anyway, I know we're getting into the nitty-gritty, but something to think about.
Okay, Scott?
So two things, sort of building on what Michelle said.
What I just say.
Re-emphasizing, what do we mean by program? Love to see some definition of that. And secondly, I'm still going to agree with what Kim said about that 600, 400 kind of thing. But if we're talking about, but then you got fuzzy on it. If we're talking about some substantial changes in terms of moving kids around, clearly there's FTE, just plain formula FTE consequences. But then there's this sort of transition thing that we're talking about. What exactly does that mean? I think it would really help to hear from somebody, Sasha's not here, right? A Sasha level kind of person saying, hey, if we move 50 kids from here over to here, this is what we anticipate the transition cost to be, and what would that look like? An extra counselor? I'm just kind of throwing stuff out. What exactly does that mean in terms of what those costs look like?
So like Stevens Crossing happened in the middle of this year and added another, I think, like 70 kids, I'm going to say, mid-January, in the middle of the year. So we have a good example of a school that figured out how to absorb a whole new community of kids into their school quickly in the middle of the year. So we've got a good example. We could go figure out what they had to add quickly.
I think that would be really useful for us, and in terms of kind of planning purposes going forward, in terms of what those transition costs are, because I don't think there are zillions of dollars that there.
Well, and I will say, so my 500, 300 was not like the literal example.
No,
It's
I
just
know.
telling you that you are impacting in another part of the system to do that. And we differentiate right now in our staffing formula. We have a differentiation that we made bolder than it had been. So we hold back 8%. We used to hold back 6% and do it on poverty. We held back 8%, and we do a bump on historically underserved, and it has a definition. We could be bolder. I mean, and there are other things that we differentiate for folks in priority schools and things that you end up getting additional weighting to address populations of kids or circumstances, or and there could be other things that we do to differentiate for a circumstance or a transition, or like I think there are some creative things that when we're talking about the things like we could identify in X circumstance, here's a formula by which we think about additional staffing you get to navigate a transition. Or, I mean, so I think thinking along the lines of differentiating for a transition circumstance, like I think you could be sort of directive in what the statement is that you make, but also kind of specific about what considerations that you want us to think about as we're navigating a transition. So I agree we can be way bolder. Like we started in down a differentiation trail, and we've been bolder than previous.
Agreed.
But we could keep going. Yeah.
And then the income segregation issue, is that something you want us to weigh in on? Or?
I'd love it if you weigh in on that. Yeah. I mean.
Okay. Joe, this will be the last.
So I want to ask you questions
Oh,
right now.
Let's go,
Say
Alice.
again.
Alice.
Well,
Yeah.
but Joe has already spoken, so I want to let Alice, you go first, yeah.
I guess, like, the committees work so hard, and I'm still struggling with some things too. But I think that if that system piece of the lever gets figured out, and if it is this review process, regular review, then I do think that there's a element of fairness there that people can consider. And I think for me, the key piece as feedback is heard from communities, because we will hear feedback when families are impacted, but it's just going to happen. But that the response is consistently based on what we say we're going to do in response to analyzing what happens with developers, so that people with more political savvy don't get a weightier voice.
Okay, Joe, and then we'll.
Yeah, so this idea of the transition period and transition resources is actually, this is one of the best discussions we've had about it, because I can see a different time frame. And your example of a school that could do 70 students in 6 months, I mean, that seems pretty fast. Be ready for that, that seems pretty fast.
But it was a real one this year, when we had Stevens Crossing go in, and at one of our elementary schools had to all of a sudden figure out how they absorb a whole influx of kids.
Right, so that's one to learn from, and maybe we should.
And that's why I think we could go find out. I don't know specifics to give you right now, but we just had it, so.
And so the last point I just wanted to make is, I can imagine that part of what we're talking about take, there's only so many Stevens points the school district can handle at any given time. And that some of the change we're talking about, especially the equity-related ones, the big changes, is probably a phased multi-year thing, just because there's enough of them that the school district can only afford them in. And in the midst of that, this is where we almost fell apart from the get-go. We got to deal with really clearly in Chapman. We got, the overcrowds now. And what stalled us in the beginning was it didn't make sense from us from our equity lens. So we were still trying to build this foundation. We thought we have to deal with that. And the facts are, whatever system we come up with, it's got to play the long game, and it's going to have to deal with that. So if we have a long game, if we have a game that's lined up with our objectives, that there's commitment at the board level to get to, it takes a little of the pressure off of having to fix things. But I don't know.
Okay, so any last words?
Just, I'm appreciating the framework that you're building. I think this is exactly what we were hoping for, is something like this. And just that, I appreciate you continuing to wrestle with the stuff that are just tensions. And I think figuring out how we have a roadmap for us to navigate the tensions, and as you say, be able to come back to values that were the things we said were driving us to begin with, and that we get to it being fairly matter-of-fact for people, is going to be a huge difference. So I appreciate you continuing to keep moving it.
Okay.
And I'm happy to come back at whatever junctures it's helpful to come back at too. So please just say come back as you get deeper in. I mean, it's actually helpful for me to hear what you're wrestling with. So and to get to throw some stuff into the hopper. So anyway, so thank you.
So Judy, did you want to?
So just confirming, can you confirm that this item will be ready for discussion with the board, like it should be slated on the board's agenda on
July 6th. Right.
So Carol, is there any lasting words to the committee to prepare them to have something that they?
And we're just doing an update to them on the.
Correct. It will be,
right.
So
we're just giving them a set.
It will be to do what you just did with the superintendent. So
Right.
you
and kind of getting stuff back from them.
With Carol, she gave you your feedback. Now you'll get a chance to talk about that and incorporate that. Come to a final. Okay.
Point of clarification.
Yes.
Because I believe this committee was originally told it was going to the school board on the 7th. And now so with it being the 4th of July weekend, a lot of plans have been made and schedules have been changed. Now I'm hearing the 6th. Is that just a misspeak or was the meeting moved?
No, July 7th was a target date. We never confirmed it as the 7th,
So
but
it's the 6th?
it's, yes, that, so
Did we
that's.
get an email about that?
Wait a minute, is it really?
Yes, the board had to move their meeting.
They just put the calendar up. Yep.
Oh, follow it.
I mean, if you need it to be the week after, we can move it the week after. If that's that big of a, if a scheduling snafu for a lot of people, we can move it to the next week.
I find this conversation very interesting
Okay.
because we were asking for a little bit more time and you were saying, oh, but we were supposed to do that in June and now we're moving it to 7th and now you're saying it's just an update to the board and now you're saying, well, if we need to, we can push it back. I'm just
Okay.
really
So
confused
Kim,
about the inconsistencies.
I said exactly what I laid out in an email that I can resend to the committee, that you will be going to the board with a report for them to give you feedback the first week of July. The target date was July 7th. They had to schedule it with the new board. It's a new board. It's not the same board. If it is that big of an inconvenience for the committee, because obviously we need most of you to be there, we can make it work for you.
That's not my point.
Okay.
I'm just saying the inconsistencies in the language being used is frustrating.
Okay, what I'm saying to you is there isn't any inconsistency, and I can send you the email.
And
all right?
I appreciate that that's
All
your
right.
perspective. That's not
Okay.
my perspective.
Well, I'll resend the email to you.
I don't
All right.
care about the email.
Okay, well. All right.
You guys, thank you very much.
Thanks, Carol.
Appreciate it,
Okay.
hearing the conversation.
Thank you.
And I can tell you, thank you for sharing this. I'm serious. Like really, I'm serious. Like, this is a good work that you guys are doing, and it's a really thoughtful document, and I really appreciate how gnarly these issues are, to try and do a framework that holds up for people, and that people both can get and feel like we can keep coming back to it, and it holds integrity. both internally for us to be able to really use and make it functional, but also for the community to see and feel like they can have some faith in it. So anyway, thank you very much for the work you're doing.
All right.
Bye.
Thanks, Carol. Thanks, Carol.
Okay, so now we're moving to a discussion among the committee about trying to move to a decision.
Right,
Okay.
so,
Just a suggestion that maybe
Okay.
we can spend a minute or two just recapping what we've heard both from the
Sure.
superintendent and amongst ourselves, because when you're speaking.
Okay.
so why don't we do, 5 minutes, just like recap what we heard, questions that she's asked us to address, and then we'll stage the discussion based on the unresolved issues.
Okay. Sounds good.
Yeah.
I can
Okay.
explain what I heard, and then everybody can jump in, because I don't know.
Way to jump out there.
So, a few things, I just think like that, this is my brain, jumping up here. So, some of the feedback we heard is to continue to figure out how to make this matter of fact or boundary review as, of course, is something that happens in the district on an ongoing basis. And these are in no particular order. To continue on a system, sort of a systems thinking framework at a high level. To look at things like on-ramping budgeting, so not to go into the weeds around budgeting, but if there are values you have, such as resources don't follow, then call it out clearly. And I don't know what clearly means, but call those values out clearly. The other thing that wasn't said explicitly, but that I felt like I heard, was to create sort of an explicit, and I don't think this was from the superintendent, but from our discussion, to create some form of continuous improvement, explicit sort of continuous improvement cycle. So if this is going to be something that's annual, and we're going to do it, and we're going to need to be clear to our communities why what was done, and potentially how we could do it better if we set up in the beginning that we are operating under a continuous improvement model. We may not be perfect, but we will, act, do, evaluate, and keep going. I think that is something we might want to add or look at being more explicit about. And that we saw this sort of as a reset. So we see this, that there's both this ongoing, this desire to set us up for ongoing, but I heard from a bunch of people, this is a reset. Or this being the first time we do this is some kind of reset or different than the ongoing. And so just that. So that's what I heard, and I'm sure other people heard lots of different things.
Okay. Tony?
Yeah, I think I heard more conversation on the conflict between building fast. And also, I think, we had some discussion around transition. And I heard a couple examples of transition, and I even had my own example of what a transition might be, but in terms of the levers on what type of transition it is and what the lever we use, it's actually even tied to are we going fast or slow? Because a transition where everybody in the school, the neighborhood with boundaries impacted gets to stay to the highest grade, that means a kindergarten staying all the way through, 5th grade or 6th grade, right? So how, I think we need to figure that out.
Okay. Michael?
One other thing that I heard from Carol was that if we want her to make a bold move, she wants an explicit statement from this group saying we support doing X or doing Y rather than you could do something like this and you take the heat for it.
Okay. Hector?
So I totally agree with what Michael just said, and it really fits with Kim's concern about budget and resources. And my recollection is that early on, and I quite frankly don't remember how it still shows up here, is that we had a discussion about we need to do a bold reset now and then create a system that does not require constant bold resets. So, and I think it would be good for us to consider what Michael just said about, and again, it's kind of mirroring what Kim was saying, we need you to find the resources to do the bold reset. And that's the bold sweeping statement we could make to the board. We need you to find the resources to make that bold step, you know, and if we could also make the long-term case, it'll save you money down the road, and it'll save heartache down the road.
Exactly.
That's our case.
Great. Scott, then Michelle.
Then Joe.
Oh, then Joe.
Joe.
Yep.
Oh, and you.
Okay, Scott.
Somebody else first?
We'll go, actually, why don't you go, because we're letting people go who've spoken, who have not spoken, right?
Because I don't talk much, which is weird.
Yes, you do.
Shh, not out loud,
I know,
just
but
in
you
my
do.
head. Anyway, there's
Says a
lots
lot.
going on in my head, let me tell you.
We can hear it.
Oh, that is not good.
And it scares me.
I'm not saying anything now. No, kind of based on what Hector said, and really, Alice, I appreciated what you said about, I forgot what I was gonna say, damn it. That's okay, you guys give me a hard time. No, that I think that, we talked about the people, the communities with more political clout. And I think it's really important that the more sweeping change we move, the less potential we have of different communities feeling like they're the ones who are being put upon. And I think it's really important that we continue, I mean, I think that it was really clear in our survey, it's really clear what Maxine said, we are not looking at equal, because it's not equal, and it never will be equal, and we have a lot of history that we're trying to fix. And so I think that if we're too careful, then it allows for different communities to say, well, look, this is happening to us, why isn't it happening? Or the community that has a stronger voice will say, in the communities that don't have that strong voice or don't know how to navigate the system, will say, look, once again, there's a sweeping change and we're getting screwed. So I think it's really important that, I feel like the more dramatic change we're willing to make, the less dramatic it's gonna be after a year or two, if that makes sense. Like, the more dramatic we are in the front, the more it's gonna make people, it just, if we get everybody off their center, then everybody has to find equilibrium. But if we let take a few people off their center, then it's just, it really, yeah.
So we're going, okay, Scott.
So the bold reset, though, is going to be a slow motion bold reset, because a big piece of that bold reset is K-8 back to K-5 middle, and that's not going to happen right away. And we also will have immersion programs coming in, and hopefully a SPED dedicated classroom balancing process that, again, probably won't happen right away. So I'm still trying to figure out what this is actually going to look like year by year over the next 5+ years.
Agreed.
But I think it's going to be wave coming back, ripples coming in from the side. So I mean, that's kind of my understanding of how it's going to play out, which means it's not going to be big reset and then little stuff. It's going to be for a couple of years. And the more that we can work with DPS to sort of lay out when the domino, that's probably bad matter, but when things are going to move, the better in terms of being transparent.
Okay. So I'm gonna let Sarah go because you have not spoken first. Sorry, I'm just letting people who have not spoken go first. So Sarah, and then Jason actually hasn't, and then we'll go back to the horse. Okay.
Well, and it just, Scott, I want to,
I appreciate what you said, but I want to push back a little bit on the being in a K-8, and I don't think if you're going to change, some of it does need to be fast, and maybe we're strategic about some K-8s change right away because they're at a point they cannot, you know, so I guess I don't want that language of it all needs to be slow to work with. You know,
I'm just reacting to what the superintendent said.
well, and then financially, right, we can't do it all. But I guess I want to, what I heard people saying and what are the lived experience of people who are in some of the Ks is that you might not want to change it and wait till the kindergartner ages out. It might be you just throw the families into a flux for 1 year, and I had this conversation with the parents. Yeah, your fifth grader might have 2 schools in 2 years, but then it's settled, and then you know. I think for some of us, so I guess that's what I would just say is I think it might, and if we're clear and transparent about, we're going to start with the highest priority based on the priorities of their values and lay that out so that everybody, I think you're right, Shannon, it might not put some communities in flux until 2 or 3 years out,
Right.
but they'll know because will have
Thanks,
really clearly articulated that.
in our minds.
Okay, I love that you just made that happen. Anyway. Jason.
All right, so
Remember to put your card down when you're done, unless you want to get back on the list, so I know.
So I want to go back to Alice's point on kind of like, you know, the politics of whatever change is going to happen, and those who have the loudest voice or the connections to the board are the ones who are likely to stall the process. And so I go back to 2 things. Like, one is like our first value, which is like putting students at the core of all this. And so then I take that and go back to some of the proposed language that we put in this document, which is, and it's, I don't know if like this is enough or like where else we need to repeat this thing. And so I start, it's page 4 of the policy language section, which is on communication and public notice. So we frame that new section, which is around district shall use effective culturally responsive techniques to ensure that participation rates and feedback on boundary changes reflect the student demographics of the district. So your primary source of information is based on the students that you're actually serving, like as a starting point. And then to Alice's point, to really think about kind of the political piece of this, one of the things that we put in here too, which is the new section E, which is the district will identify and share with impacted communities how their input was used, and if not, was able to be incorporated in the outcomes why the decision was made. Like, I feel like we're putting in accountability measures so that whatever recommendation that Carol presents to the board encompasses the feedback that they've gotten, which is reflective of students. But I wonder if, do I want to put a mechanism that says whatever final decision the board does is reflective of like how it's actually going to serve the student demographics that they're charged with serving?
You could say that.
Like, I would put that, I mean.
Yeah, could you repeat that?
Yeah.
Repeat that, I'm sorry.
I'm more or less saying, we're trying to be, I mean, if our value is really kids at the core of all this, like, to an extent, I care what the parents think about, but our times, I really don't care. Like, and I said it on camera, and I own that, and I'm fine with it. Because for me, it's like.
I need you to repeat that exact statement though.
No, I'm not
kidding.
So I think my point is, like, if the district is really, if the board is going to make a decision that is going to serve the students that we are all charged to serve, I want to make sure that the decision that they're making is actually going to serve them, not so much the people who know how to call them and actually can either fundraise for them or vote them out in an election cycle. Like, I'll just put it like, that's where I'm coming from. So I wonder, my question is, at least for that section, or do we put it in somewhere else that says, you know, the final board the board package that they officially vote on has to acknowledge what feedback that they got and how is that reflective of the demographics that the district is serving in terms of the student population. Like, I just want to put some kind of stopgap to ensure, like, the parents have a concern, but my job is the students who I'm impacting, who I have to look at every day, and you and everyone else. So, like, if we're going to be student-centered, I'd love to figure out a way to make sure that if we're going to own that and Carol's going to own that, I want the board to own that too. So, as a transition from your point on the political clout to putting something in this that instructs Carol and others to do it, I would just throw that out as just a starting point.
Okay.
I don't know, that's just me.
Okay. Joe?
So, two things. One is, that we could put a policy in, and actually, Alice, when you said what you said, I thought, if it's not in there explicitly, just almost as you said it, maybe even, in our whereases, or, like, that's gotta be in there, because it keeps coming up. I don't know how to do it 100%, but we're gonna say that plainly, just like Alice said it. And then we can build policy. But you know how this, I mean, we just did this the other night, and we can put policy in and it's good, but you gotta think, what leverage does it give you? And what I mean by that is, it can, whatever we put in here can so easily be ignored if that's what you're really worried about. What we're really worried about is not judging the board, because I don't know, this is just a board. This is how city council can work. So you want to build something in that can cause a little trouble if it goes a different way. That's a good way to think about it. And our policies here, I don't know what that is. Or, we're going to be briefing the board, right? But I don't know why, at some point, we may feel like we want to make the rounds with the board. Because another way we build this in is you find a couple of board members who get it. Because everybody's got a different point of view, and you just found, at least for this period, that this board exists, you got an advocate for you, and it takes a little bit of pressure off. But then the thing I really was getting at is, it's almost, the progress, I feel like we need to run scenarios. I think we're at that point, because, and I don't know if that's practical, and I don't know how it fits in, but these things we're saying about fast, slow, how, we can get, it's too hypothetical for me. I want to see how it runs, how it simulates out. Then we know, oh, that's too slow, that's too fast. We can get a sense of how these rules that you all can make up to move it actually affect these parameters we're thinking about. Because hypothetically, I don't know how.
Well, I think getting the information, sorry to jump in, but for Stevens Crossing, of what Hayhurst and Robert Gray had to do, might help as one way of guiding how to run the process.
Okay, so I just want to read through the list I have just to make sure I got everybody. So I have Michelle, because the cards have gone up and down. Michelle, Margaret, Pam, Hector, Alice, and Jason. Is that everybody who's got, okay. All right, Michelle.
Okay, I would like to know if we are going to have board representation on this committee in the future. That is not what I was planning to say, but you made me reminded me of
Good
that.
thing, because they haven't shown up in a while.
Well, Matt's was out a long
and I can
time
say
ago, and then Pam was
Here and
coming, but I think we need to recommit.
Can I answer that?
Oh, yeah.
Yes, you will. It's just the new board has to form and they have to reappoint. So they will make their own decisions about what committees they want to have. And so the committees that are in place essentially expire. The new board will decide what committees they want to continue, if any. And then any like this, they make their own appointments. So they'll select who.
That was not my comment.
Yeah.
That was something that I thought of.
Yeah. Just wanted to make sure you knew. You will.
Thank you.
Yeah.
My comment, I'm going to reiterate my comment until somehow I get acknowledged, which is, now I'm going to reinforce what Scott said, what I was saying.
Whoa.
And I think I said this last time. So I'm still struggling, and I think this helps with, instead of writing in policy about how to do the accountability, I really think that not in the administrative directive, but in this body, that we call for what Scott and I were talking about, which is we're trying to get equity in program, and I still feel we don't have, what is that minimum? And last week, Maxine and I kind of were talking about how all schools might need to just have the same core, which they do have, but it's clearly not enough, or it's not doing the job. So where are we trying to, and then we talked afterwards, like, what are our goals? Where are we trying to get to with this program and this access? And I just think we're going to continue to struggle with getting to where we want to be until we define what the program is. Does it include counselors? Should it, is equity in counselors mean that some schools have more counselors and that's weighted differently. That's what Shannon brought up. And we kind of really have to resolve that to go from this deficit. How do you resolve a deficit if you don't really know what the deficit you're trying to address is? And I mean, I have in my own mind, and when I think about it, a lot of things come up, what that means to me. But I think as a group, and I probably have a lot of like misconceptions or preconceptions about who has program and who doesn't and what that means, because it's not clearly established. And so, and then I know at one point we talked about foundation fundraising and how people can supplement their program. Is that part of the program? Are we trying to deal with that? And I hate to be like here at the 22nd meeting and still be like, well, what program are we trying to normalize or equalize, and how far do we want to go with equity? Like, how much more program should we be adding to schools? I really just feel like, until we know what the program is, we have some sort of target for that, and it somehow meshes with capacity in the buildings. Like, we're just going to be talking in circles. And I think I said that last week. So I'm just going to keep saying that until I have a better feeling like we all agree on what the program is. Shannon once said, let's look at the high school programs and just get an idea of what that current distribution is, and does it look equitable, and how would we change it and make it look equitable? And because that's really what we're trying to do, right? We're trying to get numbers of students to furnish a program. I think that's what we're trying to do.
Okay. Margaret?
So I think I don't know how to change the language, but I think that there is a slight shift. So I feel like I've been saying the same thing too. So I don't know. We use deficit language a lot, and that's problematic. And you get stuck in it. And so what ends up happening is we see this as, that we're mitigating disparities, right? Like we are mitigation, we use that language a lot, as opposed to investment. Like, this is a really different mindset. And we talk about access as well. I'm really more interested in outcomes. And there's there's some body of program that will get to outcomes, but access in and of itself is a very low standard. And if that's the standard we're aiming for, we will not get the results we're looking for. So just to say that students have access to things, and if they choose to take, because the next sentence to that usually is, if they choose to take advantage of it, there would be a different outcome. That's not how it plays. The responsibility is with the adults to get the different outcome. And so it takes a significant flip. So I don't know, I mean, we talk about access as one of the values. I think it's a tough one for me. To me, it's a very low bar. Right? Like, if we can't figure out how to get kids into places that have some semblance of something, I don't know. But I think the outcomes, like, what are the outcomes? And that goes, I don't know if it's that we're looking at, we have the desired outcomes, and there's the goals and the milestones. Like, is that really what we're aiming for? And there's a theory of action that goes into those, and that's how you get to the program. That's part of it. But it's a tricky slope that we're on with the language, and I think we're getting ourselves boxed in, I guess is what I would say. And I think the other piece is we're looking at this shifts. We're looking at how this plays out, and we're talking in very sequential ways. The systems in my head are cogs in a wheel, right? Like, they're gears, right? And we're out of sync. And so some people are getting ground up in the gears more often than others, right? And so if you can get the gears in sync, then your machine is much more efficient, right? So we keep seeing this as sort of sequential. We do this, we're plodding along like dinosaurs, right? Like making a movement. And really, I think we have gears. And if we can get them in sync, and we talk about, like, if you're doing program changes over here and boundary changes, and we get them linked, you're going to get synchronous outcomes you'll get magnified outcomes that should end up, or you'll end up really getting ground up in it. So I think if we start to think about it that way as well, and the feedback loops will feed into it, then I think that will also help us about how that moves forward. And then you can see, with a small turn of a lever, you can get very magnified results, right?
Great, okay.
Green card.
Green, okay. Pam?
So I like that you keep bringing this back to positive language, because I think that's important. And that wasn't in my confidential. I do think, what I was gonna say is, in listening to this, I kind of, and this is really sort of, maybe it's too tactical, but I feel like it's about looking at things on immediately, but also like, what's the 3 years, like the 3-year cycle, so that everybody gets hit. I mean, everyone's not gonna get hit at once, right? Like this, we know that this is, the district doesn't have capacity. So how do we create something that says, okay, year 1 at year 2, year 3, and we're transparent about that, and it may not be the same year 1, year 2, year 3, but it gets better or more effective, better, not even, but more effective, and that it works. I don't feel like I need to understand absolutely every detail about how everything in the district works, because my brain isn't that big, but I do need to understand the and I feel like we're close to there, like understanding that a building has a constrained size, and so there can be X many kids. I don't even know how many kids go in the building, but if we put X in it, we also are saying we want a program. Like I think we've said, we want a program, regardless of whether we're X minus 1 to fund that program, or X minus 20, or whatever the counselor example was last week. A program is X, and the number of students may be Y. And if that's not that much, the result of that is, somebody said the result of that is then this school over here doesn't get as much money. Well, we need to know that, but are we willing to take a stand on that? So kind of on a, the gears analogy is a really good one, because all these things do work together, and the goal is to not grind people up, but to understand that the reason we said access is because we're talking about buildings, not because we think that access is the be all and the end all. It's just to acknowledge that we're not changing programs, we can't change programs. And our scope is tiny. And so how do we expand I think a lot of it is, how do we expand not expand our scope, but expand our impact of our limited scope, so that we actually have, and what can we say within our document that says, we have this teeny scope, but we want to affect outcomes, and there's not a causality, there's a correlation. And so how do we get the gears to fit together to more closely drive causality versus like sort of tangential corollaries? And I think that maybe that's the next rev of this, but that's kind of where my brain is going. That we can't change everything, because that's not our charge, even if we, but if we focus here, well, we'll do it, like, we'll make a bigger impact.
Okay, Hector.
So I'm actually going to follow up on what both Margaret and Pamela just said. And the gear analogy is great. Our gear is boundary. There are other gears that we don't have impact on. Program. I don't need to know program to come up with recommendations for and values for boundary. Now, I think maybe the follow-up committee to this needs to know more about that. And, you know, we've been talking about the follow-up committee being D-BRAC slant SACIT. Well, maybe it's D-BRAC slant SACIT, slant program, slant whatever the other levers that Jason, Joe, and Pamela have identified for us. Maybe that new working committee needs to include all of those different areas. To Alice's and Joe's point, I'm wondering, so it's a wondering right now, it might be a suggestion, that when we deliver our report to the board, and it really fits with how you would use the racial equity lens, we believe our set of recommendations is going to raise the ire of certain groups in our community. We need to go confirm that with those communities. And I don't want to get into too much detail, but the idea is call out. We watched what happened with SACIT, and we have concerns about this board, about who you're going to listen to. I don't mean this board, I mean who you're going to listen to. And we just want to express our concern as the district-wide Boundary Review Advisory Committee, that I don't know if we're saying we're watching, but we want to call it out as we think this is likely to happen and we're there with you, or something like that. And also the whole idea, so to Michelle's having a board member on whatever the follow-up committee is, and to what Joe said, I think it's up to that committee to work with the board liaisons to make this a more worthwhile thing for them than it appears to me it is right now. And if it means working with individual board members in advance, but certainly once we have board liaisons, I think it's up to us to work with them and help them find their place here. I think that might be.
Okay, just I want to make one comment because you're the second person to talk about doing individual meetings with board members or jury sit rounds with the board. I just want to make sure that's the committee's prerogative if you want to do that, but it's not.
That's just what we figured out.
Not any part of the process.
Yeah,
but
that's what we were
if
just
you
talking
choose
about,
to do that as a
actually.
committee, you absolutely have that prerogative to do that. I just want to make sure the official part of the process is presenting at a board meeting and getting the board's feedback as a whole body. And you have 2 liaisons on the committee. I just want to. Okay, thank you. Alice.
I have so many things to say, so bear with me, guys. First of all, I'm really sad that that our youth members aren't here because I want to ask them, and not that maybe they would specifically be the ones, but there's got to be an app for that in terms of modeling and simulations. And not that we would know how communities like get angry or don't get angry, but at least we could see some scenarios. And I know, Judy, you were talking about that there are some systems out there that can help with figuring out program stuff, and maybe we don't have the resources for that, but maybe that is something that long-term we ask the district to look towards funding if we're going to have a continuous improvement model down the road. So that's something. As we figure out these levers, and if we do a big change, I think the other thing about having that piece about that we're going to be looking at it every year, I think reduces some of that, hopefully reduces some of that, well, this big change happened, now I can just personally make this decision and move somewhere else to say no. Because we're going to be looking at it continuously. So I think that builds in some help with that piece. Every place is unsafe. Or every place is great. I really appreciate what you said, Margaret, about the positive language, and at the same time, also recognize that for communities who have experienced a lot of challenges over and over, that there's a what's the word? There is a survival benefit in knowing our history, and so that we don't experience the same thing again. And so I think that there's a tension of not getting stuck in bitterness and being positive, and also not being foolish. And so I think Jefferson is a good example of recognizing the historical while being aspirational. So I think that that's something that we should look to as a good example of, maybe it's not perfect, but it's a good example. And so maybe we also need to think about, as we, and myself included, are sitting here and worrying about how community is going to react, is to also ask the whole community to be aspirational about, as these pieces hopefully get aligned really well, that some of the language that maybe is that we really do believe that all community members want the success of all students. And that we are asking them to take a leap of faith as we do this continuous monitoring of our system to get to a place where our districts is one from, where it is now as compared to other places nationally, that other places look to us as one that is a model. And I do think a board accountability needs to be in there as well.
Okay. Okay, so Jason, and I'm just doing a time check, it's 7:32, so we have till 7:45 scheduled for this. So I have Jason, Michael, Michelle, Joe is who I have right now. And I don't see any more cards up. Okay.
Okay. So a couple of thoughts. I'm hearing a lot of ideas, and so like in my brain, I'm trying to go back and forth between like what needs to go into the actual boundary review framework now, and what are the things that are outside D-BRAC scope, but are the things that boundary review is actually helping the district to achieve. So I wrote up on the whiteboard while everyone was talking to kind of split it into two categories. One is the actual framework components, and so at least some things that are still unresolved, at least I heard still, were the issues around sibling and how are you grandfathering, kids into certain schools and how that plays out. Don't know how, but it's there. And I think to another point around how you move kids in different buildings, what's the resource investments to actually that follow the kids so that things get put into place. And I actually broke resources actually up into two categories. One was funds that serve as what I call transition funds. So as buildings are transitioning to different things, as enrollment is shifting, you've got short-term investments that keep the program viable so the kids that are still in the building don't feel the impact of an enrollment fluctuation. Long-term is what part B is what I call startup funds. So for example, if you're looking at building out new programs, things that take multiple years to build, like an immersion program. You can't just say, oh, I'm going to look at a new immersion program here and boom, I'm going to have grades K through 5 full in year 1. Like it takes time to build up 2 sections at multiple grades. So it's what are the initial resources there that need to go into play. Again, it's depending on how you're doing program location and then also the grade configuration, because some new elementary schools are going to get reopened. So that's what I see as things that are in our scope that fit into this framework, at least as a starting point. The second part is kind of things that are like outside our immediate charge, but things that boundary review helps inform. So I think the things like what's the long-term scope of programs for the district? Like if your long-term goal is to have like immersion programs in every cluster. I think for me the question then is, what does healthy enrollment look like in order to have immersion programs in every cluster? And how does boundary changes help schools have the sufficient enrollment to actually get there? So for me, I'm looking at it also as, well, I don't know what those numbers look like, so what I'm thinking is that's part of summer work after the framework is completed, so that we can say, okay, once you know what the long-term aspirational goals are for the district in terms of programs, here are the numbers, so at least actually understand the different tools and the pieces. We then come back in the fall when maps get generated to say, okay, if the district has said they want the following 10 programs in every cluster, how do the maps actually put the district on a path to get there? If great, yes. If not, here are the lines where it need to be changed, where things can actually happen. Because I'm also looking at things like, okay, you've got issues of huge over-enrollment and under-enrollment. So how do those conditions actually factor in? Do the maps actually help achieve those issues of hotspots both over and under? So I'm in this moment of I'm willing to set that aside as part of future, because building could be at 98% utilization, but is it really overcrowded? That's part of the things that we came up with a while back when we looked at utilization numbers. Is that an effective measure of school building actually being overcrowded? So, because I think we saw a while back where the numbers at East and West Sylvan were at like 90-some% utilization, but like I've been in that building and it's incredibly overcrowded, at least when you walk in. So like, how do you filter that out? So I'm looking at it as some work so we can actually get a sense of how to really understand those numbers, so when we come back in the fall, we can actually get some real numbers and actually know what it feels like per building and per cluster. So at least to help me sort through everything that we're talking about, what's immediate versus I'm okay to let it go for now, knowing that we address it in the summer, because like when I see a map come my way in September or October, is how do I know whatever new lines are drawn, those are lines that are gonna actually help achieve some bigger long-term goals. And to Alice's point, yeah, if we're trying to get community buy-in about the long-term vision, like I need to give them some clear steps, like to get to the long-term 5-year plan, here's what it feels like in year 1 and in year 2. If I can give them some tangible things to at least hold on to, then I can get there. And for me, part 2 of that helps me get there.
Okay. Michael?
So several things rolling around in my head that I'll just title Food for Thought. And I think this is great, and I think, having some aspirations and thinking about what we're going to do is the best we could hope for. First one is, equity in funding. And so I just looked at PPS data, and I said I picked 2 more well-to-do schools, Wilson and Lincoln, and I picked 2 more historically lower income, more minority, Roosevelt and Jefferson. I looked at how much do we spend per student at Lincoln and Wilson, and how much do we spend at Roosevelt and Jefferson. And when you put in everything, all the funding that comes from the parents and so on, and when you look at on the one side and the funding comes from Title I on the other thing on the other side, we spend 40% more per student at Roosevelt and Jefferson today than we do at Lincoln and Wilson. And still, even though we're spending 40% more, I don't think we're getting excellent results at Roosevelt and Jefferson and lousy results at Lincoln and Wilson. So at some point, if you spend 60% more, or 100% more, or 200% more, I'm not convinced that's the model that will get us to equity in terms of making sure every student is successful. So that's one thing that's bouncing around in my head. Yeah?
Just ask a question. When you looked at that, did you lay the information in terms of what those expenditures were, like side by side, so we got a sense of what those expenditures were that caused 40% more?
I didn't have that level of detail. Again,
That's
this is
the one I want to know.
Yeah, this is just a
That's the detail
PPS kind of one-pager, for each school, how many students, how much funding comes in, how many FTE, and so on. So I really didn't have that level of detail available to me. I just did a very high level. The other comment that I got, so I talked to some principals and said, hey, what do you think about this, issue where you have schools where you have a really high percentage of kids that are in poverty? And I said, and they said, well, that's an issue. They said another issue is attracting teachers to come and to stay at those schools. They have a lot of turnover in teachers. That, as has been discussed in this meeting several times, there are a lot of things that happen with kids that have been exposed to. If you've been very low income, if you often have had parents who have been involved in drugs, which may or may not have affected you one way or another. All kind of things could have happened to these kids. They've been, I think, trauma informed was maybe the word that was used, or maybe I got it wrong. But at any rate, that's a challenging environment. And so the question is, on a boundary point of view, that's something we could potentially do something about. On the other hand, Oregon schools are funded at, we're like number 40 out of 50 in the nation for funding. And so it sure isn't like we have extra money rolling around, and certainly for the higher income kids, you're getting a mediocre education right now. And if you say, and we're going to take away a huge percentage of that to move it to some other kids that are just even in worse shape than you, I think we'll have a hard time getting those parents to stay in PPS. So we have to kind of think about how can we make this a win-win. And that brings me to the last thing that's bouncing around in my head is I think as Alice was saying, and also some of the things that Margaret says, we have to think about it as a community investment. What are our aspirations as a community? How do we make our community, and since we're a large percentage of the state, our state more successful? And part of that is making sure that as many kids today become responsible tax-paying citizens down the road, rather than becoming involved in the criminal justice system or dropping out of school and getting a very low-paying job to where they're always struggling and never really contributing. And so I think those are things we can think about. Is if we want this to be successful, we probably have to make some bigger changes rather than just a little tweak here and a little tweak there. And but we've got to get the community behind us. And it really has to be, we're investing in our community, and here's how it's going to benefit everyone. Because if we just say it's going to benefit this group of kids and it's at the expense of that one, I don't think that'll ever be very successful.
One thing that I would say about the data, about your numbers, is that until you can, really provide additional data that in that way that you just presented it is pretty irrelevant because we don't know what makes it up and why a situation exists. And I wish we wouldn't so much use stereotypes in terms of, kids coming out of homes with drugs and things like that, because that's not necessarily the case. A lot of people, we have 800 families that we provide housing to, and that's not, drugs is not an issue in there, but they do work 2 or 3 jobs, and they do, have less education, and then they have less opportunity. So there's a myriad of factors. I just wish we wouldn't use stereotypes in terms of what we think may be the makeup of that household.
You're right, and I apologize. That was just an example that was given to me, and it was probably not a good one.
Okay. Michelle. And then Joe, and then I want to try to move this along. Oh, Tony. Okay.
It's a little bit related to what you're saying, and it's kind of going back to our premise, which is that for any of this to work, we have to have every school being a strong school that people in the neighborhood are going to want to go to. It's a neighborhood school that has a certain set of assets that is serving the community, right? So when I think about the map and the moving the people around, like, we could draw a lot of lines, but it's only going to really function successfully in the Margaret's cog, if we have if we have success in getting the person who we've told that they need to move to actually want to do it, right? And so the reason that I'm thinking about the programs is that we have to be, that student needs to either think about moving or actually move, and then find that it's good for them, right? And so this is a student, I'm trying to think like a child and a student, or the parent, which I am and I have, and we want to not just draw the lines, but make it an appealing choice, like not choice, but move. And so our success is really predicated on each student actually moving the way we've asked them to move. And the reason that the program, I keep thinking about program, is because the money, every time we successfully move a child, we successfully move the money, right, for that child, and that is what's used to hire the teachers to build the program. So I'm still, I'm trying to think of ways that and other people have said this too, that we really make the whatever words go out to the public, which they will, positive and motivated, like, and I don't know, inspirational or whatever some people have said. This has to be like a moment where we say, this is how it's going to work, and we want you to buy into this working. And if they don't buy into it, it's not going to work. So, because every kid that we successfully move around that's the meat and bones of the program. I mean, and maybe I'm wrong. Maybe that's not how it works, but that's just how I see the system working. So I'm very I really want this to be something that not only has values and details, but does have some nuggets of inspiration somehow.
I'm going to let Tony go, and then Joe will. Tony.
Yeah, I think it's unfair at this point to talk in generalities and, and throw things out that they need to be fully investigated. I mean, the fact is there are many things that produce positive outcomes for students, some of which this group's not gonna have any control over. And we're tasked to look at one of those, which is boundaries. Whether it's the leadership in the building, or the funding that's coming from the district, all of those things impact. And funding's tied to students, and then we know that having an adequately sized program in a building brings funding and things that students need to achieve. And, we can put all that there and still not have a good outcome, but we're gonna have to figure out how to fix that as well. But our challenge that we're forced to do is getting students where they have the opportunity to have a positive outcome. And that's regardless of their gender, their sexual orientation, their race, their religion, or whatever.
Okay, Joe and Pam.
Okay, so the idea of starting with outcomes is actually the right thing. That really resonates with me in all this work. Okay, so outcomes, seeing the difference in the student outcomes is what our target is. And actually, when you read our stuff, it's funny, we keep burying it, and it's in there, but it's I don't know, we talk about delivery of academic programs, elective enrichments, and support the services for all students. So we have this kind of outcome-y language in there, but we should come out and say, okay, outcomes. What serves student outcomes? I don't want to get into that now. But I would want PBS to have a point of view on it, so I don't have to. Because we can plan towards this proposition of what makes a difference in student outcomes, and then how do you equip a school with those resources. So we kind of got a sense of program, and actually the program's differentiated, right? Because there's a fundamental program, but you want to differentiate for the needs of the students, right? Okay. So we've got a fundamental. We've got, depending on the composition in your school, differentiation. And that's what we're saying to the extent that we understand it today, the package for outcomes. And then you got a building that can handle 400 kids, you got a building that can handle 800 kids. And those happen to be in place. And we don't want to throw the whole system up so that schools have no relationship to their place. So a little bit is what's going to be, depending on how you draw a boundary, what's the composition of the school, how much of this base budget and differentiation budget do you need? And have we made a system where you got enough room in the budget to have base and differentiation when you need it, and base when you don't? I don't know what the programs are, you know what I mean? But I do believe that there's some package and then some other packaging. I'm not saying they're the same thing, but the level we're working at is just we got to find a surrogate for it, because we can't design this program. But we know that there's a program. This is in my world. I would say there's a program that's X thousand a student. And then there's a differentiation that's X thousand per student, just for kicks. I'm just turning it into an economic proposition. We're going to populate schools so that they have enough kids to hit that nut, as they say. Now, there's parts of this I don't understand at all, like what's like when you're trying to teach kids and do differentiation. Is programs part of it? Does student population mix matter? Is that something we're going to try to design for? I think we said no, but sort of yes, but no. It's right around the margins, you know what I mean? We said no busing, right? We're not going to be that dramatic. So we are sort of playing with geographic boundaries. And I think if we could model this, we could see it. We could see where are we hitting it and where are we not. And the other thing I fully expect to see is that if this is the dream, some are these and some are these this, we don't have that money. So that's a scary one, because then, does this program does this base get held harmless? And so that means we squeeze here. Well, that's the classic dilemma of those in need don't get it. But this is not going to be acceptable to a wide part of our parent population. And so I don't know what much more we do with criteria until we can sort of see this. You know what I mean? Because I think we kind of got a set of values shared, and we got to solve for the problem, solve for the, how to get a sufficient number of resources to the school so that it can have adequate program, and let the school figure out the program. You know what I mean? Like, that's a whole separate thing. That's probably worthy of discussion, but that's not our charge. And and the last thing, and then I'm going to shut up. If you look at mine is page 4, but you know where we got the list of the other elements of the enrollment balancing system? When you look at it, there's 6 of them there, right?
Page 6.
Oh, it's page 6, okay, yeah. Right. So we want to focus on outcomes. We want to differentiate to move the bar on equity outcomes. That's the whole business we're in. We got geographic boundaries and geographic schools, so we're not going to blow that up. But we want to be more aggressive about how to make this program and differentiation work. And we got to do it in the context of some schools that 400 kids in some way. I'm not really sure which of these 1 through 6 makes the most difference for that kind of formulation. You know what I mean? And the only so I'm just a little bit like, oh, I don't know. And the boundaries is the one where we get to move kids. So. I think I'm to the point where I would just be playing with boundaries, testing propositions. See what our rhetoric looks like when we put it down there and try to ask.
Okay, Pam, and then we gotta try to wrap this.
So some of these things, these are actually back to the concept of programs, but and they're two completely different, disparate elements. So the first is, I don't think moving kids from one building to another is the most productive thing to do. And I'm not speaking as an educator, but I am speaking as a parent. And my children, I do not think moving children from one strong program to another strong program is the worst thing we could do to them. I don't think it is trauma-inducing. I think it might be difficult, and it may be more difficult for children who are experiencing trauma than other children. But I'll speak from my personal experience. I moved a first grader. I moved a second grader. My children one of my children attends schools that the entire school moved. Then the entire school doubled in size. These are not normal things in PPS. My child was fine. And my kids are not necessarily one of them is not necessarily a thriver in PPS. One is. It was hard, yes, they cried the night they didn't get to go back to school with their friends. It was a hard month, it was a hard 2 weeks. But for many, not the kids who are experiencing trauma, but the other kids in our district, we are not, this is a parent problem, it's not a child problem. And I think that we have to remember that kids are incredibly resilient. And if we can, and I'm just going to stop there. The other thing is, I think that whoever said we have to, we're not at a point where we're pitching this to the district, and I know this is all on tape, but when we try to get buy-in to this, that's a totally different thing than this document. And I have a marketing background. I did marketing and strategy and all that stuff. And if I wanted to stand up in front of a group of people, I wouldn't do what we did with the superintendent today, which is read our document and try to get some really concrete impact feedback. And I think it's important for us to consider our impact on the community, but I think we have to remember that we need to have a process about that or talk about that specifically, but we can't let that inform how we work, because I think it's true we can get buy-in to this, but we have to leverage how we get buy-in when we know what we're getting buy-in to. And I just want us to stay focused on what are we getting buy-in to before we focus on how do we get the buy-in. And that's it.
Okay, so we are about 10 minutes over on that. I'm just going to say, so you had stated at the beginning, Jason, you would hope to maybe get to a vote, and my judgment is that that's not, you're not ready for that as a committee tonight. So you need to do some work. I mean, the two pieces of direct feedback we got from the superintendent were flesh out the language on speed, you know, how fast you make change and how big. Just, she wanted a little more language on that. And the other was to make your statement about resourcing change, you know. So that was it. I mean, the rest of it, you know, she said, hey, this is good. So those are the two pieces.
She also said she wanted something about
Thank you.
Yes, she did. Thank you. You're right. Okay, so those are the three, right. So you have a little more work to do. I'm moving us into the next steps just real quickly. So I just want to read what, you know, going back to the process. So when you go before the board, and this is what I had emailed to the committee, the purpose of your board presentation is to give the board an opportunity to hear, understand, ask questions, and provide feedback on your recommendations in a public forum prior to the superintendent making her final recommendations to the board. Okay, so it is meant to be a time to go and say, okay, here's where we're at. We heard this from the superintendent, heard this from the community, here's our recommendations, and then let the board have that same opportunity before you deliver your final thing to the superintendent. I apologize about the confusion about July 7th versus July 6th. We're scheduling a new board. They have different schedules. It's when they were available. They put it on July 6th. The next board meeting is not till July 28th. So you really need to shoot for that July 6th meeting because there's no opportunity between the 6th and the 28th. Otherwise, we will be legitimately getting behind schedule. So if you look at that, July 28th is when the superintendent's going to want to make her final recommendations to the committee for them to get into their process. And we'll still be on schedule because that was scheduled to go to the board in July. So it'll be the end of July, but we will hit that month then. Okay, so that's just a process update. Jason, do you want to take it and talk about next steps committee? Jason, Judy?
I would like to add to that too, that one really important element of it, so we can set goals, timelines, and targets, but things change along the way. And I fully expected that you as a committee might be at a point right now where you have substantial new criteria that needs to be added into policy in order for a team to go and model and come up with boundary scenarios. At this point, that's not the case. You've looked at the criteria, if I understand correctly, and you've said it's not perfect, but it's in line with the community's values, and it's enough that you can move forward and do modeling. You do not need to revise policy language at this time. You're not recommending in this document changes to board policy language. You are emphasizing that the superintendent and board should leverage the flexibility in that policy language now, especially around things such as the exception to the implementation plan, go faster because your policy allows you to do that. But you don't have to make policy change. That's important because if you were doing that, then we would need something as solid as possible, as soon as possible, so that we could do a first reading and then a second reading, and then technically wouldn't be really able to apply all of those changes and do our modeling until that second reading was over. So you can see from a timing perspective, with fall being the time when we want to really see what the effects of this could be, if we needed to make policy changes, we need more time to do that than what you guys have come up with. So the fact that you're not recommending policy change, which we didn't anticipate before, means that your level of certainty, what has to be absolutely done by July 6th, is more flexible than what I even thought it would be 2 weeks ago. I went on vacation. I went to San Antonio for 4 days. I came back. You guys came up with a great solution along the way. So that was smart work on your part. So keep that in mind in terms of what you're shooting for, and if you can have a framework, your recommendation on a framework for district-wide boundary review, that's your charge right now. That's your active charge from the superintendent. If you can finish that and pass it to her prior to discussing it with the board on July 6th, that would be great. She still has time to think through their input before she presents something for their feedback later in July. If it's not finished by then, if it's not voted on by then, if you don't want to work 48 hours straight over this long, hot weekend to do that, there's a little bit of time in between. But just be aware that in order for staff to do the modeling, we need to know what we're modeling on, and we need to have that tested not just with the committee, but through the superintendent and board. Otherwise, we're modeling things that would be nice to look at, but will be public documents that create a whole other level of consciousness and concern across our community about changes that you're just contemplating, we're not actually intending. And it would take an enormous amount of staff time and effort to build to that, which would probably also slow the other things down. So that was just my statement around your time frame, your deliverable, how it relates to staff modeling, and if that helps, let's think about what that means for your next steps.
Scott and then Joe.
So I have no sense, you talked about capacity for modeling. I have no sense what that capacity is. And some kind of, you could frame that for us. We can do X amount in X amount of time. Would be helpful so that we know what to expect and how to prioritize what we ask for.
Okay, so I don't know how much time we have, so I don't want to respond.
Yeah,
to-
I'm not saying.
Okay.
Okay.
Right this second.
Okay. Joe.
So what if, because Jason wanted to tell you, that makes sense to me, that as next steps, part of what we do next is, what if we had a framework, it's kind of like what we had, but taken more the direction we talked about tonight, and we give it to you, and you guys tell us what the current criteria might be, what we're implementing. And then we could all just sort of take a step back and say, does that make sense to us? You know, because there's some disconnect between how one interprets this to, it's almost like the AD, right? Is the AD what criteria look like? Mm-hmm. So, I mean, I can look at those and imagine, but I don't know the full universe of actually measurable, modelable things that one could make a criteria out of to try to accomplish this. But you guys do. And so I'm willing to look at your list and then apply my judgment to that. See, that's a little bit, we're going to make up stuff we can't measure. I don't know. I feel like a little help around that part of it. We know what we're trying to get to. In a big, layperson's kind of policy separate. And then how does you operationalize that to criteria that can be used within boundaries? That's just one question.
Okay.
I was just going to say,
Sheila?
one of the things I was going to say earlier was, is there going to be a set of diagnostics once we do create maps that show what is the impact of these boundary changes and our criteria? So you showed us that one spreadsheet.
As a rough example.
As a rough example, and I'm imagining as you change things in the model, you show how the different things that we're shooting for change. Distances from school, who has to be, who might be socioeconomic mix of the school, all of those things. We would have a set of diagnostics that show us how a set of boundary changes affects all of those criteria, right?
Yeah.
So I think what Joe's suggesting is that if you give us those things that you can tell us about when the boundary changes, then that might help us understand how we can measure the impact of the decisions that we're
You mean the operational terms that we use to apply so what's in policy and AD gets turned into operational language, like distance from home to school or this is what we're trying to figure out. So You've got Sarah and Sean there. We have an intern that's here that works with Sean right now. There are others on their team who are involved with this, but the reason they're here listening is because when it becomes real, we need to figure out how to model it. And we have done this before with high school system design. We've done it with a few other boundary changes. We can give you examples of what we've done in the past. Because we've been in Operation Clean Sweep this week, and I've been purging files, I actually have come across really relevant examples of this just recently. It's been a wonderful week. But that, I'm not sure that that's even satisfying to you. And I wanted you also to know that, John, like, we are fully prepared to come back to you and take you through some of the technical elements of what the modeling process would be. We just know that you haven't had time to devote to that because you're also trying to produce a product, and that sort of technical part of how we do is different than this. So we haven't been trying to skirt the question. We've been waiting for the appropriate opening. I certainly didn't think it was tonight, so I don't want to try and do it off the cuff.
Okay, Pam.
So I just want, so I don't think the moment is tonight. I think that what we're grappling with is or what I feel like at this point, and I don't think I felt it till tonight, is we just laid this stuff out, and I have no idea if this has changed anything that you would in your, like, if your model is A plus B plus C plus D plus E, that's the only way I can envision it in my brain. Did this change B to F? Or did it do anything? Did we sit here and come up with something? Like, we don't even understand. Like, I guess what I'm struggling with is, does this, or the draft language in the AD, does it do anything? Or are we?
Yes, I'd be happy to try and answer that question.
Like a mapping of, even if this isn't perfect, a mapping of this to, we talked about this really early on. That would look like an equation, and I'm putting that word in quotes. But what does this look like as an equation? Not how does it affect Roseway Heights, but this looks like this equation, and before this, it might have looked like this equation. So have we, and I think that that's maybe what for me is the next level of understanding. I understand the sort of politics around not throwing maps around. Yeah. That completely makes sense. But maybe getting one more level of specificity. I think one more level of specificity might be helpful at our next meeting.
Okay.
If that makes sense.
So I want to disagree. I don't care about the algorithms. I'm an algorithm guy. I want to see if priorities went A, B, C, here's what this school population catchment area would look like. If it went B, C, A, it would look like this. If it went A, C, B, it would look like this. That's.
So I hear that stuff, but that's like playing with people's, that's like sort of, I mean, I think that there's dangers in that, in that you're kind of messing with, if that were my community, I'm not sure I'd be playing with it.
So having said that,
okay, just real quick, I got Margaret's card up, I got Michelle, and I got Sheila's yours up.
I've been up for a while.
Okay, oh,
Yeah.
sorry, you guys look like one card. So I got Kim, Margaret, and Michelle. Okay.
I
Okay.
just think, Scott, I'm worried that it's impossible for us for them to say that because we haven't set priorities on our criteria. And so, you know, like, there are a, you know, n factorial number of solutions to the equation, or something. You know, so, I mean, and somebody's gonna have to decide which of these solutions to the equation gets chosen. So I'm not, you know, like, I understand, I'm with you on wanting to understand how our criteria map into real boundary changes, but given that we haven't prioritized the criteria, I don't think there's a way that they could come back and say, this is what it would look like using these criteria. There would be many, many possible solutions. So that's, I'm done.
Okay, I got three, it's 10 after, so we're scheduled to end in 5 minutes, and I've got 3 people on the list, so Kim.
A few things. The things that Carol brought up tonight, I'm not quite sure that I think that that's our place to put language in there as far as the budgeting. That's not us. As far as, I think that what we've said is very clear as far as the pace. I guess I feel like I don't think it's necessary to put in the things that she's talked about, and maybe I'm alone in that, and if so, whatever, that's fine, I'll move aside. The other is, I get the hesitation of not making maps because it makes people uncomfortable. On the other hand, we've never done this before, and so if we don't start looking at maps, we have no idea what this is going to look like, and we're just going to have to tell people, like, I don't know how else we're going to do this without producing maps. And yes, it's going to be uncomfortable, and yes, you know, whatever. We've never done this before. We need to start being more courageous and stop worrying so much about what it's going to cause out in the community. Because to be honest with you, I don't really care. I care more about what is it going to mean for this kid and that kid and this kid and that kid. I need to see that on paper. I need to see that. I don't care that it sends the parents into, you know, chaos.
Can I ask a clarifying question? Two clarifying questions. One, no additional language above what's already in the document, because you address resources in there now and you address transition in there now. So you'd be comfortable with, I wanted to clarify that you're not saying take out what you have, you're saying don't add more.
I'm saying that, yeah, I don't know that we have enough expertise to add in more language. And
Okay.
again, maybe I'm wrong.
Okay, and second point of clarification is you don't feel that you could endorse a guiding framework without modeling of the impact of the framework. It's not a question of would we ever draw, I mean, clearly we are really anxious to get to the map stage, but we wanted the maps to be guided by a set of values and desired outcomes. And so, are you? So am I hearing that you're not?
This is the framework.
Yeah.
Yeah. I guess we don't know what you need.
Right. We don't know how
So we don't-
this
I think we're sort of
equates to maps, so we don't know if we're okay with this without looking at maps, because I have no idea what this looks like in real life.
I got you, Joe. I got you.
Yeah. So to clarify, I don't know.
Okay, I appreciate that.
I
Well,
don't
no, I
know.
mean, it's helpful to hear, like, is this about we can't move on the framework, or we need to know after the we have a desire to know the overall process between the framework and the next stage of something pops out at the other side, what happens in between?
Yeah, I mean, basically, we have great intentions. I mean, I know what our intentions are, and I feel like a lot of us are on the same page, but we might see that in a map and go, oh, no, that's not what we were looking
So,
for
and
at all.
if I could just assure you that, so I understand that this is the first time that you all have done this. This is not the first time that some of us have done this.
Okay.
In fact, some of us had a career doing this kind of work. And even though we haven't done it this big in Portland, it's happened in other places. And if I saw something, a direction that you guys were going in that scared the heck out of me, and I thought we couldn't do it, I would tell you. I don't know whether you would believe me, but I would have told you by now.
And not that something we can't do, but you've been listening to our conversations, and I guess is what we're saying here transferable to action?
Yes, absolutely. Can I tell you that, would it be helpful to hear my two big takeaways?
Yes.
From where you are?
Yes.
Takeaway number one, we're going to create maps and diagnostics so that you can see the impact on all of those factors that are listed. You'll see the impact of all. And this was I gave you guys a technical memo for your last meeting. Yep. Go read the part of it where I talk about this, because I made a point of telling you this to reassure you. And I don't have it with me, and I could pull it up really quickly, but essentially, we're also going to run models that optimize that do the best for the top 3 of the factors that you guys reflected and that aligns with the community. So it's feeder patterns, proximity, and use of buildings, right? So compact boundaries. What can we do that gets us the most compact boundaries and fits in our buildings? What fits best in the buildings, even if the boundaries aren't compact? What makes sure that we have aligned feeder patterns the most? Now, on every one of those scenarios, you'll see the impact for every one of the factors. And you'll get to see, if you do a whole lot of this, whether it really screws up something else, or whether those are trade-offs that you're willing to make. And then you can think through, and so then the second really important part of this is we probably need to do some implementation analysis so that you can get a sense of how it could be implemented going slow or fast. So that you don't have to be in the bind of trying to guess which of those things is right for all without having to see the impact of any of it. We just simply need to help you and others see what that would look like. Go fast versus go slow. And we don't even know what that means right now, so don't ask me any questions about that, but we need to factor that in. So those are the kinds of things that I have heard that we will translate into mathematical software actions and follow-up analysis over the coming 2 months once those things get nailed down.
Okay, so to clarify, you're saying before or after, I don't know, so let's say we go to the board on the 6th.
Yep.
We present this.
Yep.
Or update them, or whatever you want to call it. Then Carol presents her thing on what, the 25th?
At the next possible.
The next,
yeah,
the
available.
28th? Okay. And what if we run and the board makes whatever decision they're going to make in August? I don't know, I'm asking, I don't know how that works.
So by the beginning of August, the board has endorsed the framework that you guys have provided.
Okay.
And maybe there's any changes, I don't know, but let's just say they love it.
Okay, so then.
They might not.
So then we
not.
get
Right, we've said
into,
that,
so
right.
then we're like, okay, now we're to the technical part.
Yep.
Now we get to see the maps and stuff, and what if we say, I mean, I get that you're right along with us, but what if we're like, oh, we need to go back? What does that do? And I'm sorry if I'm drawing this out.
Okay. Right, so we're not gonna, so it's an iterative process. We may have to.
And we can do that?
Yes.
Okay, that's what I don't know. If we've gone to the board,
Yes.
can we go back and go, yeah, we got that wrong?
You guys you have to take a look at these things and advise us how well we did and give us
Okay.
suggestions if you can on how to get them more right. At the same time you're doing that, we're going to be all over the community and you're going to be with us hopefully helping to listen to where other people think we may have got it right or got it wrong. And out of that will likely come additional iterations that try and solve for those tough spots. And that eventually is what the superintendent will land on to get to the board. And to get that piece done in a 3-month period of time is like Herculean. But we got to get going. And so that's where like false precision now doesn't help you as much as being strong in your values and your guidance on things like just what are the big tickets. The other important part of this that you guys have put in here again and again that will be critical for the superintendent and the board is that you apply a racial equity lens in your evaluation of whatever we do. There's nothing else that says that right now. We want to get to the point where you can actually do that. And so I would encourage you to think about the most that you can say now that will help drive that action and assure you that we will do the best we can to give you technical specifications along the way. And know that there's no point where it's just too late to say anything. Well, by the time it gets to, even when it gets to the board,
it's not too late.
But what you want is a system where a lot of those messy kinks have already been understood before they got to the board. You've figured out how to make sure that the stakeholders involved have had a chance to know it and respond to it. And that's what goes to the board.
Thank you very much. I don't feel like you have felt like you can be that direct with us of late, and I needed to hear that, so thank you.
Thank you for letting me take the time to do that.
Okay, so people are starting to wrap up. So Margaret was on the list, she left. I have Michelle and
I can be really quick.
Okay.
So this document, if it goes to the board, if we have a board presentation on the 6th, this will be in the board meeting materials, right?
Correct.
So this will be our first public deliverable that we have. We need to get it ready. We need to decide if we're going to address the money thing, the discussion of segregation, or what we're doing, if we're doing anything in our thoughts about diversity or lack of diversity, or Mr. Porter's concern, because I heard her say that that was something she would appreciate hearing more about. And so I am totally like getting more comfortable with the let's have this just be more vague and less specific. Like, okay, I can do that. But I still think we need to have a document that like I said before, has some real, it's gonna be going public and maybe nobody's gonna read it, but I have a feeling like people are gonna really read it and they're gonna take it quite seriously. And we wanna get those elements in there if we're gonna do them, and we want it to be useful. So you're already saying it is useful, which is good to hear. The superintendent seemed to think it could be maybe a little more useful. So how can we get this? I'm feeling really bad.
I know.
For the subcommittee. Like, I'm feeling like I can't really, I feel like I can't ask you to come up with language and stuff that we haven't even really talked about. So I don't know what to do. Like, I don't really know what to do next.
So, I don't know what to do next, but I can tell you that certain people have handed, this sat here and drafted, this could be a better paragraph, or this is my thought on how to do this. And to the extent that people have that in their brains,
And this is a first
You're-
draft.
the first draft, and
It's
if
just
you,
a discussion.
I mean,
Not
honestly,
our
Michelle, if you have
final.
edits and changes and things that you think, say what you think it should say, please just send
I mean,
it
I
out.
think you can go
Like,
through.
Don't stand at ceremony.
Right. I think you can go through a process you did, again, preparing for this meeting, where you send out the new language to the committee and get feedback the same way you did, that you said worked very well, and then that can get you to a place where you can go do this presentation to the board and get that last piece of input, and then you'll be ready to finish it. I really do think that can happen.
And I think the
So-
administrative directive stuff, especially the edits Judy made today, I'm really pretty happy with this. It's more like I was saying, the sort of motivational language and some stronger statements about where we're coming from, maybe, I think, for the public.
So
I don't
there's
know, do we care about the
There's a
public?
Google Doc, and I can attest to the
Right.
fact that it's very easy.
I'm not
to
so
go
Very
to
easy
Google
to
Doc
edit it.
I
and
know, but
edit
I'm
it.
not very good at that.
You're great at it.
Yeah.
And you know
None of us
what?
are
There's
Michelle, none
no
of us
way
are
to
great.
fail at this
We're all
point.
learning.
Every comment right now is of value. I mean,
Yes.
if I would just say, like, on behalf of the hard work that we've all seen the subcommittee do, there is no way to fail as a committee member now if you're taking the time to get your words in there. If you're not taking the time, or if you feel like, well, I'm going to say it here, but I can't do it there, then that's more difficult. I don't think it's fair to ask that people continue to hold everyone's ideas in three heads. It's, right? And I've seen them very fairly sort of take the edits and manage them, and so, agreed that it's highly possible.
Okay, so let's wrap the meeting.
let's.
And we're 10 minutes over, and then we can huddle the subcommittee can meet and work on getting updated language out to the group in time to get feedback, okay? All right, if people want to fill out an evaluation form, please do, and turn them in to Jason. And we're done.